Well, good morning. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News, coming to you from our digital desk. We want to have a conversation about Lake Erie. We love it for the recreation. It's a beautiful addition to Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, but there's also been some issues over the past few years with what's called an algal bloom. We are pronouncing that right, algal bloom. It is essentially algae that starts growing mainly in the western basin, but depending on the year, depending on conditions, that algal bloom can really start growing towards Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, and it presents a number of problems. And we're going to talk to some of the experts in a minute. They do give out a forecast every year. You can see the picture on the right-hand side. That satellite picture was taken on the 13th of May. And you can just start to see the beginnings of the growth in the western basin, where you see that kind of green hue. And I've been covering Lake Erie for a number of years. I've seen where that picture can get tremendously worse throughout the summer. It has a lot to do with fertilizers that are used in fields in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. We'll get into that in a minute. The forecast, if you look on the left side, that bar chart, that dates back to 2002. Each one of those years, you can see there were some really tough years. Really in 2015 is the highest it's ever been, 2011 the second highest, and this year is expected to be a moderate to moderate high. That's that red bar. That's kind of the range that the experts think we could see algae and this algal bloom in Lake Erie. If it hits the high side all the way to the top of that red bar, it would be the fifth highest since 2002. And again, this is something they track every year because it is so important to the environment and the health of Lake Erie. With that in mind, I'm going to make one adjustment here. We're going to bring in from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Dr. Richard Stump. Dr. Richard Stump, how are you today, sir?
Very good. How are you, Dan?
It's good for you to join us. We appreciate it. He's an oceanographer. First of all, Doctor, let's talk about why this is so important. Why should the average Clevelander, the average Northeast Ohio resident who loves the lake, why is this so important to look at now and keep track of throughout the summer?
Well, there's a few reasons for that. While many people there go straight to the lake in that area, they may have reason to go further west. And these blooms, this type of algae called a cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, produces a toxin. And that toxin can accumulate in scums. These will come up to the surface, and that's a risk for swimmers. It's also a risk for pets. So if you have a dog and you see scum, I can't emphasize enough, please keep your dog out of the water.
Explain scum. I don't want to go too much far. What do you mean by scum? What does it look like?
Green stuff right on the top, like green paint kind of color, looking right on the surface of a lake or even ponds. But on a calm day, windy days, it gets mixed through the water column. So the biggest concern for your average person is that risk there. If they're mild blooms, they typically mostly stay in the western basin. There's sometimes some localized blooms, though, in Northeast Ohio, although those are too difficult for us to forecast in this way. But the big bloom that starts in the western basin stays there if it's mild, but when we're starting to look at a 5 and above, there's a definite risk that it could actually get into the central basin and start getting close to the Cleveland area, depending on the winds.
And let's talk a little bit about how this happens. We're going to have a little bit of a greenhouse lesson, I have a feeling here. I mentioned the fertilizer that farmers use in the spring in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. Where does that fertilizer go, and why does that pose the problem?
These blooms really like phosphorus, and the phosphorus fertilizer farmers use phosphorus on the fields. They would prefer to stay on the fields, but unfortunately get runoff. And the more phosphorus that goes into the lake, the bigger the bloom is.
And I did notice in your prediction that was put out, there's a lot of talk about the next 2 weeks. What is so important about the next 2 weeks and the weather we could or couldn't have?
Okay. The key phosphorus load is from, excuse me, from the beginning of March into July. And that's driven by what comes off the fields, which is partly how well the fertilizer stays, but also how much rain you get. We use forecasts, an ensemble of forecasts going out weeks to try to determine what may happen for the next, from now into July. And what we're seeing in that is there's unsettled weather coming in with rain over this week, next week, but the amount is not quite certain. It'll be at least normal, but it may be above normal. And the more there is, the more runoff we get and the more phosphorus. So that uncertainty leads to uncertainty, as you see in the graph. Once we get past this couple of weeks, we're into more of a typical late spring, early summer. I mean, we're coming up to Memorial Day, so we can call it summer. We're into a more typical summer condition. And so then we're a little more confident about our forecast for the load.
We're speaking with Dr. Richard Stumpf. He's an oceanographer with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Doctor, we like to give the final word to our guests here on this topic. What do you want people to know? What do you want people to remember and walk away with?
Well, an important thing is the bloom doesn't cover the whole lake, and it doesn't cover the whole Western Lake. It moves around a lot with the wind. We actually monitor and forecast that. And if people would like to know where they can go boating or where there isn't a bloom so they can enjoy the lake, it's possible to get that information from us.
Excellent, very much. Anything else you want to add, sir?
No, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
Doctor, we appreciate the information. We love the lake, but it is a mystery to most of us, especially when we start talking science and phosphorus and algal blooms. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, take care, sir. Again, just something we like to keep an eye on every year. This forecast comes out, and as you heard from the doctor, we'll have to wait and see over the next couple of weeks just how bad this algal bloom gets and whether or not it starts to approach the central basin and then towards northeast Ohio. And of course, when we find out, we'll make sure we give you updates. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be here on our digital platforms. Our noon news is coming up, but our 11 o'clock news is underway on CW43. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19. Have a good afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media at Cleveland 19 News.
Doctor, thank you so much for the time. Doug, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Whenever you need any questions, glad to help.